now for a really special episode of Sound Advice Entrepreneurs Unfiltered. I'm joined by Steve Hare, CEO of Sage and a member of the Prime Minister's Business Council, and Sophie Cornish MBE, the multi-award winning entrepreneur, author, founder of notonthehighstreet.com and now chairman of clothing brand Busby Fox. Today, Sophie and Steve are going to go deep on how to build a business that fits in with your vision for the life you want, not one that forces you to compromise. We're also going to look at how today's business owners are adapting to modern challenges and how to thrive as an entrepreneur, whatever the world throws at you. We'll be taking a sneak peek at a new piece of research from Sage, which looks at how UK entrepreneurs are doing right now, their hopes, fears and dreams. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome, Sophie and Steve. Jam-packed episode ahead. Thanks so much for taking time out to join me.
Thank you so much, Bex, and lovely to meet you, Steve. So I'm really looking forward to it. Big fan of the show.
And you, Sophie, and good to see you again, Bex.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you back. You made a cameo in season 1. It's one of our most popular episodes, so it's great to have you back in Hot Seat. And Sophie, you're really passionate about one of today's themes. We talked about how hustle culture has sort of taken over, but actually you can design a business that fits in with your life plan. So tell me, how do we work out how we want from life and then design a business around that?
Wow, well that is the biggest question, Bex. I don't know if I've got the immediate answer to that, but yes, I can absolutely say I do just love a plan. And I think I wrote my life plan when I was about 8. And now that I'm 58, I can honestly say it didn't change so very much over the years. I guess by having a life plan, I simply mean to say that it's hard enough to land a great job or start a business, but then all too easy to then find that that's kind of set you on a life path that is just actually not what you choose. So as much as you write a business plan, I just strongly believe you need to think about what you really want for yourself and very importantly, when. Are you going to want a career break? What's your response to stress? Where do you want to live? How important is the sport or hobby that keeps you sane? And yes, so what does business success look like for you in that case? Are you driven to play a significant role in something that feels big and high profile, or do you just simply want to share a talent that brings people joy? Or do you want to do something that feels worthwhile, that the planet needs what you have to bring? And I think you just have to it's very difficult to figure this all out from day one, and nobody walks into their A-levels kind of able to kind of be clear about that. But the one thing I will be honest about is that as in life, as in business, the freedom to execute on your plan pretty quickly comes down to money. And as a woman, perhaps even more so, because the evidence still shows that it's still women who are the most affected by bumps in the road, like cost of childcare and career breaks. So yeah, I do really believe in a plan.
Did you have a plan, Steve? Did you kind of think what you wanted out of life, or did you get swept along? Because you've had a lot of big, high-profile jobs. Was that always in your plan?
I think I had a broad plan, and funnily enough, as I've accumulated more experience and I've learned more along the way, I think I've created a better plan, if that makes sense. So I think when I was younger, I probably did get quite swept away. I had a plan that I wanted to be successful in business. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do that, but I did want to be successful. And the more I got into it, I suppose the more driven I became, because I decided, actually, I quite like this. I'm quite good at this. But it absolutely didn't take the path that I intended, really. And I think as I've got older, I've got much better at reflecting on my learnings and therefore achieving a better balance, if you like. So I've always been very committed. I've been quoted in the past. I always say, if you want to do something, you've got to be all in. But that means you've got to be all in when you are doing that thing. And I think what you get better at, certainly what I've got better at over time, is exactly to Sophie's point. You actually start to realise, well, yes, this is important. Being successful in my business career is important, but my family's important. My well-being's important. So I must do that exercise. I must do that sport. And actually, when you're doing those things, be present in what you are doing at the time. And that's what, when I was young, I was terrible at that. Terrible. So I would go and do something, but I was still thinking about work. And so I'd be thinking about 3 things at once and really never fully focusing on any of them. And I think when you talk to high-performing people, whether sports people, business people, or whatever, I think they're very good at, they take whatever they're doing at the time, whatever they're committing to, they do it and they achieve extraordinary outcomes, but it is not their whole life. And I think when you talk to people who say that the only thing they do is their work and their career, and they work 7 days a week and they work hundreds of hours a week, I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that's sustainable. I think you have to look after yourself, and you have to engage and invest in people around you, whether that be in business or personal.
I like the idea of a plan because it's almost a kind of visualization, isn't it? Like when you write something down, when you think about it and make a kind of concrete path that you could follow, you're more likely to sort of make it happen. What was on your life plan when you were 8? Do you mind sharing that with us?
Well, do you know what? My father read it out at my wedding, our wedding. So it's I wasn't given much choice about that. He found it. He found a piece of paper and read it out at our wedding. I mean, mainly it was about, there was something about when I was 8 years old, or exactly, when that I knew I needed autonomy. I knew if I was going to get what I wanted out of life and what made me happy. And honestly, I knew I wanted a family when I was 8 years old. That I was going to have to create that autonomy. And that was about, for instance, I don't know, having a career where I could I could be the one to decide when and where I work, for instance. And, it was those kinds of things. It was very much about autonomy, and it was about money. I don't know why. Maybe my parents were kind of entrepreneurial. So I was always overhearing conversations about money and conscious of how that drove so many of your decisions. So I think it was quite conceptual, but it was, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And did that lead, do you think, to Not on the High Street because you suddenly saw a way to have that freedom, that autonomy, but also kind of build a business that would bring financial security, but was also quite fun because like the business itself was just like a joy, wasn't it, to build with all those makers?
I cannot tell you, Bex. It was absolutely wonderful. It was both kind of wonderful and horrendous to Steve's point. I worked so hard. I just literally don't know. I don't know how I survived, but also I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was joyful. It was wonderful. It was just one of the most wonderful things about my life. And yes, that was one of the things that was I couldn't have imagined doing something, for money that wasn't also something that really drove me. My mum was a best-selling novelist, and she always used to say that if you find the thing you love and that you're good at, work is like riding downhill on a bicycle. And I guess kind of that was my plan as much as anything, because that's what I kind of always heard.
And so you worked super duper hard at the beginning, and then did it ease off a little bit just in time for your life plan stuff to kick in? And how did you make sure that things happened at the right time? Because you kind of need your business to be at exactly the right stage if you want to take some time out of it, for example. How do you make the dates line up in your mind and in reality?
Well, you don't. I mean, you don't. But you kind of keep your north. I had my North Star. So if things were veering off in a different direction, I kind of had to kind of like check myself and say, the temptation to do this for 25 years instead of 15 is there. But I know that I really, and I suppose, and maybe a small example is, I missed a lot of my children's a few kind of years of their childhood, and that was tough. But my daughter's hilarious and mocks me mercilessly for the parents' evening that I didn't turn up at, and that so that's I think that's we're kind of all good with that. But kind of there was a point, for instance, where I just knew they were older. I needed to be there. Teenagers don't fit into your kind of I've got an hour kind of school of parenting like a toddler does, and so there was definitely a time where I thought, if I'm going to be here for these particular years, I need to make some pretty difficult calls.
And Steve, you mentioned earlier how you do have to be super driven and work really long hours if you want to be successful. And I've heard you say that before. And Sophie's just echoed that even if your life plan is to spend some time with your kids and have a family life, there will be a stretch where you have to give it your all. Do you think entrepreneurs, business owners sort of need to prepare for that if you want to be successful, there will always be a point where you have to give more than perhaps is healthy, or you have to give up that balance, that work-life balance?
I think achieving things, achieving high performance, again, whether it be business, sport, it doesn't really matter. It requires a lot of effort, and it requires. I like Sophie's description that if it's something you enjoy, then it's obviously so much better because you want to do it. But you have to put in the effort. You have to put in the hard work, because things don't happen by themselves, and things don't go to plan either. So you need to be very resilient, and you need to be very determined to work through things that haven't worked out as you expected. And if you're someone who doesn't want to do that and doesn't want to put that level of effort in, it's quite likely that someone else will. And so, whether you're in a small business or a big business, you're competing against other people. And in the same way that if you turned up to a big sports match and you hadn't done your training, and you would, probably run out of fitness in the last 10 minutes, the people you're playing against, they did their work, right? And so they're going to come out better. So I always say to young people, particularly when I'm asked, that look, I do think it's important to make choices. Okay, life, you can't have everything all at the same time. I mean, Sophie just summed it up. At any point in time in your life, you are making a choice, because you are making some sacrifices. You can't do everything to the same degree all of the time. And I think you go in phases, therefore, that at this point in time I'm doing this, at this point in time I'm doing that. But it is really hard to do something half-heartedly. I hate doing things half-heartedly. So in many ways, I'd rather not do it. If I can't do it and I can't put effort into it and get it right, it frustrates me. And I'll give you an example. I'm trying to learn to speak Portuguese. I'm terrible at languages. I'm trying to learn to speak Portuguese, and I'm determined. But the problem is I don't have time. And so, my tutor has said to me, Steve, you have to study this language for 600, 700, 800 hours. You've done like 30 hours and you're getting frustrated. It's like, well, you can't magically learn something that requires 600 hours of study. It's proven that's how long it takes. So make 600 hours available and we'll make you fluent.
Why Portuguese? What's the mission behind it? We have to know.
Well, I spend a lot of time there, and so I go on holiday and stuff there. So I have it's a country that's close to my heart, and it sort of goes. It's beyond. It's much more than learning a language. I believe that I like multicultural. I love lots of different cultures. It's one of the reasons I work in a global business. I love the interaction with lots of different people. And I think it's much harder to get close to a culture and close to people if you're talking to them in a second language. And particularly, where I go in Portugal is rural. So although there is some English spoken, it's nowhere near fluent. And so Yeah, so I've just, and also at my age, because I'm getting on now, I was told there's two things that stimulate your brain when you're getting older: learning a language and learning a musical instrument.
Not business related, but definitely sound advice. But that point about skills does lead into my next question, which is, it sounds like if you find a business, a job that really suits your natural skills and talents, that point that Sophie made, that idea of like going downhill on a bicycle, it just feeling smoother and easier, having those skills that are matched by the job that you do and the role that you play would kind of make that happen. So have you done that in your businesses, Sophie? And how did you figure out what you were really good at in the first place?
I've done very different things in my career. I worked on women's magazines where I say I was absolutely disastrous at school. The one thing I was good at was English and history, which is really kind of a version of English in your average, secondary school. So, I didn't have a formal education, no qualifications, didn't go to university. I really was like, I don't know what I'm good at. But I did, when I started working with women's magazines, the writing just came super naturally to me, which was just, a lovely experience, really. And then once I sort of, made that shift and realised that I needed to move into business, and that took time. But yes, started not on the high street and found, I guess, that it was kind of my personal traits that enabled me to do businessy things. So, for instance, I'm naturally very much a systemizer. So building operations and planning technology in a way that we could kind of scale and grow felt very natural to me. There were a lot of it was definitely thanks to our sort of founding tech director, Joe Sims, who taught me loads. Obviously, I do not claim to be a tech person. I'm imaginative. I can kind of churn out ideas and solutions, and we certainly needed a lot of those. I'm a perfectionist, which I think the best thing about perfectionism is, and I defend, people slate perfectionism like they slate workaholism, but it makes you very driven. When you're motivated to get things exactly right, working all night just kind of makes sense. It keeps you going, and I don't mind that. And I think that one of the reasons why I found that I have enormous kind of professional stamina or working stamina is because of that. And actually, I love managing people, and I could never understand why people would say that they find that hard. I think it's the best thing of all. I kind of identifying great people, helping them develop, making things happen. I'm a mother hen, and the older I get, the more I'm fulfilled by that. So yeah, I think it's about finding what in your soul drives your kind of professional kind of attitudes and behaviours.
I love that idea. Did you find that, Steve? Because I read recently that you class yourself as an introvert, but then you're in a really public facing role. You're forced into for an introvert, I imagine that'd be quite stressful situations. You're speaking on this podcast now. Tell me about your experience.
Yeah, I am an introvert, and I think it took me a while to actually realise that despite being introverted, I'm also a people person. I just find large numbers of people all at once quite difficult, and I still do, to be honest. And it's taken me quite a long time to kind of get comfortable with how I can make that a strength and make that be me and me be authentic, but just be a bit more, not even outgoing, it's just more engaging. The slight downside of being an introvert is you are quite happy to spend time by yourself, and particularly when you come under pressure. My natural tendency when I come under pressure is to spend time by myself trying to figure out the answer, or I might confide in one person, but I'm not very good at sort of going on a wider engagement, if you like, and being open about the fact that we need to resolve something, because I'm a problem solver by nature. And actually early in my career, that's what made me successful. I was the guy who got stuff done, I've learned to get better over time at doing it with more people. But I'm a team person, deep down I'm a team person. But I was terrified. I told a story recently to some young early careers people who had come into the office, and one young girl said to me, "What advice do you have for someone who lacks confidence and is very nervous about being in a public environment?" And I said, you look at me as CEO and you see someone that you think is amazingly confident. I can tell you, when I was your age, I avoided anything remotely close to speaking in public because I was terrified by it. And I was terrified by it throughout my 20s. And it was only when a mentor of mine, basically took me to one side and said, you have all these great ambitions, you're not going to reach them unless you learn to be uncomfortable. And it was one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given is, stop trying to be comfortable. You can't be a high performer if you want to be comfortable. It's about being uncomfortable. And so you have to be prepared to try these things, which inside is tearing you up. And it's like sometimes you hear actors saying that they hate going on stage, or they're nervous wrecks before they go in front of the camera. And you just have to be prepared to face up to it. And I think early on, when I was an introvert, when I realised that, I thought this was holding me back, there was a part of me that wanted to be an extrovert. So there was a part of me that, the usual thing, you sat around a dinner table and people start telling jokes. It's my worst nightmare because I can't tell funny stories. I'm not funny, right? And so...
You just made us laugh.
Yes, but I do it now because I just do it by being me. Right? And as opposed to trying to tell some flamboyant story that I can't tell. And I think when you're young, you probably struggle to be comfortable with that because you think you need to be something else. So I always say to people, look, it's a well-worn phrase, but it's true. Just try and be the best version of you. And also play to your strengths. Yes, we all need to understand what we're less good at, but understand your strengths and really play to them. And a big advantage I have now is, obviously, I make sure that the team around me are also complementary to my strengths and weaknesses. So back to exactly what Sophie said, I'm not a technologist, so I can't write software code, but I run a software business. So I need to understand it, and I need people around me who really, really understand it. But I understand it enough, and I understand how we use it. So you've got to be brave in terms of having people around you who are amazing. And people say it a lot, don't they? Hire people who you think are a lot better than you, or bring something really amazing, so that when you're having these conversations with them, you're thinking, yes, you're learning something all the time. And then it kind of works.
I just really relate to everything you're saying, Steve. And I have my kind of professional personality profiled a couple of times, and I'm a kind of cuspy introvert, extrovert, and I know, and the everything you're saying is kind of demonstrating that the point about introverts is that we can empathize with other introverts. Too much of business is jazz hands and big talk and look at me, and I just don't know if that really helps. Is very helpful quite a lot of the time. And also, being able to bring people on and understand how different people function is so important. And I'll bet you obviously are very, very good at it.
Yeah, I think as well what you learn over time, and you create this in small business all the time, because it's you need to create reasons for people to engage and stay. And I think when I was training sort of back in the 80s and 90s, big companies were much more transactional. It was kind of, look, I pay you to do this, work hard, and if you don't want to work hard, we'll get the next person who does. And so there was no kind of real trying to create an emotional connection and win people's hearts, right? And I've always been a person, because I've played team sports, and I really believe in creating this kind of emotional connection to a bigger cause, because then you get extraordinary outcomes. If you get teams of people who really buy into something and they really want it to happen and they really go for it, and you really got their hearts and minds, you get amazing outcomes, because people don't think it's hard work. They think it's amazing.
And Sophie, you've said how much you love managing teams, and you were nodding along about how great it is to get people to work together and collaborate and be unified by a mission. So when you left Not on the High Street, is that what got you kind of back into business again, that you wanted to be involved with a team? Was that the thing that kind of tempted you back into retail?
I couldn't imagine sort of being some sort of solo operation, or certainly not all the time. I thrive off kind of, the sense of community, and I love office life. I never understand when people say, "Oh, I'd hate to work in an office." I think, what do you mean you'd hate to work? It's glorious. But I know what they mean. They're talking about an aspect of it. I do understand that. So yes, I think that kind of sense of team of being around people. But my position is slightly different now. I'm not, well, none of us are we? We're all hybrid working, but I'm not in the office all the time. But certainly feeling very, very inspired by people definitely is the answer to your question. I loved working with Emma Vowles, the founder, who's a great friend, and we just get on fantastically well, and we're a kind of a sort of leadership team of four, and but each brings their own piece. I also brought along one of my favourite colleagues, kind of ever, which is from the early days of Not on the High Street, called Kate Linus, who came down to Devon, kind of to join the team. So I slightly kind of recreate, there was an element of recreation. But there were lots of other reasons why I joined Busby Fox when I did. I was in my 50s, conscious that the market has tended to neglect women like me. And it was the perfect opportunity to do something about it, because that's exactly what we do. We kind of, I mean, obviously, we're a women's wear brand that is fantastic for all women, but we do tend to kind of create something that particularly works for maybe slightly older women. It's just so clever and beautiful that it's impossible not to create for yourself a great look, whatever your age and shape and style, which I think is actually more important and not recognised by so many brands. And yeah, I have the privilege of seeing a lot of joy on our customers' faces, and that's being small is really nice.
Because isn't there a lot of pressure? Maybe I'm imagining this, but once you've had a super successful business, and are people just constantly kind of, oh, what's next? And is it going to be massive? Is it going to be global? And how do you deal with it if that's really not in your life plan?
There's lots of kind of layers to that. I think I definitely felt pressure after we finished. After I kind of exited, when I fully exited a couple of years ago, and definitely felt the pressure to keep busy, to do something else, to sort of have have a different calling card, as it were. But I came back to what is in my life plan, which is, I really do love work. I know that whatever happens, I do want to work. It's what kind of puts me right. When things are good or not so good, that's what sets me right. That is my North Star. And so I kind of just, like all founders probably, was just ready to some extent for what came next, rather than feeling I've got to do something even bigger, or I've got to do it all again, or that kind of thing. I think, you just learn to kind of just be a bit more resilient to outside pressure. I try to anyway. I like to think that's one of the benefits of getting older.
Having a bit more perspective. And Steve, do you feel like can you get addicted to being an overachiever?
I think what you have to have all the time is is your purpose? What is it you're doing? And I can't imagine sort of retiring as such, but because I will always want to do something, and that doing something can't be, playing golf or playing tennis or lying on a sun lounger. I mean, I like doing all of those things, but that's my way of relaxing. And I will always need to be doing something which is producing outcomes. Now, for me today, that's running a public company, that's work and everything that goes with it. And I think I'll always want to do something of that nature where I can see the outcome. I'm a very outcome-driven person, so if I get involved with something, I want to know it's making a difference. I want to know that something's happening as a result of it. And I just can't imagine living without that. I think what I've learned over time is, as I've got older, is I used to create a lot of pressure on myself. So I think I've got better at handling external pressure, and I think I've got better at not quite creating as much tension. You need a bit of tension to make you achieve, but if you overdo it, you can create your own anxiety, which is not helpful. There's a place in that scale where you get high performance, and I think probably when I was a bit younger, I kept going too far beyond and getting the law of diminishing returns. But yeah, I think if you're a driven person and you're excited and motivated by doing things, you're probably always going to want to do that, right?
And we've talked a bit about adaptation, so whether it's adapting your strengths or adapting to the world around you, or, curveballs that life shows you. And you had a curveball, didn't you, Sophie, during the pandemic, because you suffered a stroke. And what I'd love to know is what happened in the aftermath. Did that cause you to change course or alter your perspective again? And what impact has that had on your priorities?
Yes, I did. Beginning of the pandemic, just out of the blue, I had no idea that I had a kind of pretty serious heart condition. I was oblivious to all of this. No idea. Just had a stroke and went into Charing Cross Hospital, like in the depths of lockdown, and all the weirdness that was. And it was pretty grim and pretty shocking. And yes, it did definitely cause some rethinking. Obviously, some of the kind of, obvious stuff, like wanting everybody to realize that they might have a stroke and they need to be quick and they need, all of that. And it will probably, that could save your life, or certainly save a lot of your kind of abilities. But yes, definite rethinking and definite impact. And I guess all the philosophical stuff that, and I'm well aware I'm not alone in this, that, incredible gratitude that I'm here, that my body works as well as it does, that my drugs do work, and there's a whole enormous machinery around us ready for when we need it, the whether it's the medical system or, whatever else it is, the financial system, whatever it is, that there's this kind of universe around us that's there to kind of catch us. Yeah, and then of course, like everybody else, wanting to use my time well, personally and professionally. And I think the professional thing is, I have reflected a lot on this, and I guess the answer changes kind of from time to time. But the main thing is that in a really, really good way, it made me realise that I am just at a different stage of my life from the vast majority of the sort of noisy entrepreneurial community, for want of a better word. And that's great. They're noisy in a good way. That's great. And so while now I think about what I want to do and what kind of work is the work that feels like riding downhill on a bicycle, is that, I could have continued to try to contribute, to be honest, probably less effectively now, with practical things like marketing, or as Steve said, technology. Even though I worked in technology, I'm not a great technologist. I kind of know it, but and that I just realised I can be far, far more useful in this kind of reflective, I'm not going so far as to say a sort of wise old owl, but certainly helping people to figure out the big implications of their businesses and their career. And yes, how it affects the overall picture of how your life could play out. And yes, like I said, that we all need a plan. And the other thing is, I did take the plunge and come off all social media. I kind of figure if I really need to know about something, it will find me. And, I'm a person, I think it's amazing. I think it's wonderful. But, I just realised it's not for me. I'm good. I'm good just hearing about things, old school. Reading a newspaper. Love it.
A lot of people are doing that. I think that you're kind of one of the pioneers in a wave of just individuals just leaving that whole world behind. And Steve, have you ever had a wake up moment like that? Has there been a point in your life, it could be involved like what to do with your family, your health, but something that makes you reevaluate everything in an instant?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of times. I mean, I think after I sort of went through the whole Marconi restructuring and ended up losing my job as CFO of Marconi. I went through a period where I ran my own consulting business for a couple of years, where I was trying to, it was a big blow to, I sort of achieved my lifetime dream in my late 30s of becoming a public company CFO, and GC Marconi was a very, very big company, and then I ended up sort of out on my backside, so to speak, and. It took me a while to figure out, did I want to have another go at that? So back to this resilience, I was quoted recently, somebody said to me, you'll never work again, in London because you've burnt your bridges, you've burnt all your relationships. Yeah, and it took me a little while to kind of evaluate that and think, well, no, I'm not done. I'm 40 years old. I'm not going to, this is what I want to do, so I'm going to do it. Maybe a bit of stubbornness there. But then there was also, look, at the same time, I went, my first marriage broke up, and I went through a divorce as well, and so I went through a bit of a period where I didn't, I was really really challenging myself as to whether I was making, was my decision making really not great, because I didn't seem to be able to bring the different aspects of my life together in a kind of successful way. And there's always, as I said earlier, there's always tensions, there's always choices you have to make. But I think you do go through periods sometimes where you really challenge yourself as to whether you are making the right choices. And it doesn't always feel like the bicycle's going downhill. Sometimes it feels like it's going up an extremely steep hill, and you start thinking to yourself, how did I get here? This wasn't quite what I intended. And actually, another one I've quoted a few times is when I first became CEO of Sage, because it wasn't part of the life plan to become CEO of Sage. I was the CFO, and it just happened that I ended up as CEO. And when I first became CEO, I wasn't sure I'd made the right decision, because I didn't enjoy it very much. Because initially, I thought it was really hard, and I thought I hadn't anticipated, being the CEO of a public company, how many sort of stakeholders and how many people would be taking an interest in what I was doing. And it sort of slightly took me by surprise. And so I found it quite hard to manage my time. And it's only, I've been CEO 4.5 years now, so I'm now much better at, again, somebody gave me a piece of advice. Do what only you can do, Steve. And that's not always the bit that is the bit you want to do the most, if that makes sense. So initially, I'm very good with internal. I love spending time with colleagues, with all our internal people. I love travelling around the offices. I didn't relish the external part of being a public company CEO. So for the first year or so, I kind of avoided that. And I always remember Amy Lawson, my head of comms, coming to me and saying, we want you to go on Sky TV with Ian King. I was like, no, I can't fit that in. And she was like, no, you can, because it's on the day of results. I was like, but I don't do TV. She goes, well, you need to.
TV is terrifying. I mean,
I was honestly.
Live TV. That's a whole
live TV,
level.
exactly.
Terrifying.
It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And at least because of COVID, actually, it's become much more common now that you don't go into the studio and you sort of do it remotely, and so you sort of have to, in your brain, convince yourself it's a Teams call. It's not really live TV. You're just having a Teams call. The other one is big presentations. I'd never done I'd presented to 50 people, 60 people, 70 people. But I did my first big conference where I was effectively, because it was our conference, I was the keynote speaker to about 5,000 people. And that was mind-blowingly nerve-wracking. And actually, when I did it, I took my wife with me. And she stood on the stage before everyone came in. We both stood on the stage, and she was like, "You are actually, you're going to speak to all these people." I was like, "Yep."
And again, I think to add to that, lots of people will say, "Oh, I'm really afraid of public speaking," but there's definitely a bit of a divide. There's the cans and the can-nots, and I find it really, really hard, Steve. And I have worked so hard through my career to get comfortable with it, and yes, do the things that feel uncomfortable so that you can kind of try and get a bit better about it. But it's still a little bit. More of us need to come out and say how hard we find it and how we've got past that. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do, and I think again when I'm talking to people early careers, development, when I'm talking on development courses, etc. I do try and come back to these examples of, you may look at me now or look at any leader and sort of think, oh, well, that's what Steve's like. But Steve's 62, right?
Yeah.
Steve, when he was 25,
yeah,
was pretty useless, to be honest. Apart from I just had an ability to get stuff done. And I think some of it is, I have got Yorkshire sort of stubbornness, grit type thing. I'm quite thick-skinned. I don't take no for an answer. So if I want something to happen, I work very, very hard to get it to happen. And I think when I was young, the way I did it was incredibly unsophisticated. And I didn't have fortunately I have a great a desire to learn. So I do take feedback, I solicit feedback, I ask people all the time. And so what that's done is that's helped me to become self-aware, because I had no idea the impact I was having on other people when I was getting stuff done, because I was a bulldozer. And back in the 90s, to be honest, if you wanted to be successful, most people were bulldozers. But actually, it's not naturally me. I culturally, I don't want to have a negative impact on other people at all. I mean, it's important to me as part of the culture that we have at Sage that there's a team ethos, and that you are leaning in to help your teammates, not trying to kind of shove them out the way or make yourself better than them. I measure everything based on team outcomes. But I often recognise that behaviour because I look and see a younger version of myself.
To your point, Sophie, I get what you mean, because it's dangerous to label yourself and put yourself in a box with the I can't. Like, I am an introvert, or I am on the spectrum here, and that means I won't even try because this is just who I am and there's no way I can change or improve. But I think that's the part of the entrepreneur, the great leader, that they will sort of challenge themselves and they will always try and grow and try and find a way through. And I know that Sage shared some of their research with me the other day, Steve, and it was all about how confident entrepreneurs are about the future. And I read these stats, and we're in a cost of living crisis at the moment. like inflation, interest rates, everything is just in flux and crazy. And yet they were saying 71% are confident about their business now and 84% expected to be confident next year. And I was like, I just love these people. Is that just the, is that just the mindset of the great leaders, the great business owners, that they are just willing to just give it a shot and they are positive about the future?
Yeah, I think COVID actually was a very big test for many, well, not just small businesses, big businesses as well, but for many small, medium-sized business owners, COVID was a huge test, and obviously there were some businesses that didn't make it through that, but I think that pretty much all the business owners I speak to, they talk about what they learned during that period, and I think they surprised themselves often with the agility with which they responded to that situation. So whether it be, restaurants who started home delivery or, people who suddenly realized, well, actually, I now need an online app. I need people to come and be able to interact with me digitally because they're not coming into my shop or they're not coming into my restaurant. I don't, and I don't want someone on the end of a phone because I can't cope with it. So suddenly all these people started investing in making things happen in a different way. And so I think they look at the cost of, and don't get me wrong, when you talk to business owners, they tell you about headwinds, but they almost have this kind of inbuilt kind of assumption now that yes, there are headwinds, but I'm going to get through them. And therefore I am optimistic about my business and how I'm going to get my business to develop. And I think you'd be amazed how many small businesses I speak to who talk about how they are determined not just to survive, but to grow their business. And it is a bit of a disconnect with the wider macro commentary about, GDP decline or very slow GDP growth. I very rarely speak to a small business owner who isn't focused on finding ways to grow their business. They're not people who just kind of sit there accepting the status quo. They're like Sophie. They're innovative. They're looking for ideas. Okay, if I can't make money that way, how can I make that? I was talking to a farmer here, a friend of mine, who's got quite a lot of wind power and solar power on his land now. And he said to me, I'm still a farmer, Steve. I just farm power. I farm solar. I farm, But at the end of the day, my business case is, what is the return from my land? And if I can't do that by growing crops or I can't do that by, having livestock, I'll do it some other way. But my business model is I make money from my land and I will continue to do that till the day I die. And that's the sort of attitude. Is I don't care what's happening. I'm not going to be beaten. I'm going to find ways through this. And I think the flip side is what you've got to help small businesses with is for them to invest in the technology that will enable them to be successful in the future. Because the most precious thing, and I'm sure Sophie will agree here, is the most precious thing that small, medium business owners have is time. And so it can often be difficult, even if it's really compelling, to get a business owner to spend time to think about how am I going to digitize my processes, digitize my customer journey, because it requires effort to do that, even though it produces a very compelling outcome.
Would you agree with that, Sophie? Do you think entrepreneurs, especially British entrepreneurs, are a real bullish lot?
Yeah, I think whether we're acting from confidence and hope and ambition or downright terror, I think one way or the other there's no question, there's no thought that you will take some kind of passive route through this. You just don't. And I definitely think that people always ask you what's the most important thing about being an entrepreneur, and definitely one of them is kind of like, how much pain can you take and how do you handle the terror, and it's it's really, really true. Something always drives us, and we just don't. we don't think in any other terms. You wouldn't. It's your baby. You're not going to give up on it. You're just not. Somebody else might force you to, but you're not going to be the one to choose that path.
And in this report, Sophie, this small business report, we saw that the business owners who invested in tech saw an 84% uplift in productivity, right? So you said you're not a technologist, but you embraced it. You learned what systems were out there. You were very on it. How did you make time? Because as Steve said, time is the most precious commodity for an entrepreneur. How did you make time to get under the hood of the tech, understand what was out there, review all the features? I mean, how do you convince a business owner who was so busy to make time for the tech and make budget for the tech? How do you do that?
We just had to. I did work with, this is not on the high street. I was very lucky that I worked with such lovely kind of giving people in tech. Also, operations and systems just came very naturally to me. So if, for instance, I don't know, we built an order management system, and I don't know why, I just knew what to do. I just knew what it needed to be. I'd had enough of the pain and the things going wrong to know that, but certainly from our tech guys, I learned a few things like, one, they can be really grumpy. That helps. You don't want to go to them with a stupid, ill thought through thought or request or problem. You have to kind of think it through and think what the clear brief is. But also, I just learned to think, if this is what we need to provide or solve, we need to do it in a strategic way. If this has happened once, it's going to happen 100, 1,000 times, and we can't deal with it through a hack or something manual. And I guess I really learned that discipline. And I think once you've learned that discipline, the rest sort of follows. So I now, and as I say, I try not actually to get involved with tech, because that's, even if I've learned a lot, there's so many people who are better at it than me, and so many people who are, younger, and there's so many widgets and plugins and you name it that I don't want to pretend to be able to, come up with a particular one that's going to, but what I do know is that if you kind of think strategically and conceptually about what you need to do, what you need to solve, that kind of does drive the right kind of understanding and adoption of technologies and so on. That was kind of my way.
You are an advisor now, so you help a lot of businesses at different stages. So I'm curious, maybe tech aside, like what are people coming to you with? Is it the same old problems today as they always have been? Cash, people, or are the problems changing? What are you seeing out there?
I think very consistently, is the sort of, like you say, the kind of cost of business crisis, as it were, and what how the hell do you, when things are costing so much more than they once did, and you're taking so much, or it's so much harder to make take your piece of the revenue, as it were, that's a kind of definitely a struggle, and I do tend to be a bit kind of high level about that, and it's I just think a happy customer is always the best strategy, even if you do have to get a bit manual about it and intervene. People come to me and ask a lot about investors, and especially equity. That's a big one. How important is it to hold on to your equity? Is it okay to let some go, or more go than maybe you intended? And I tend to say, I tend to feel if you can get a good investor, then they're more than worth it. And you don't even always get to choose. Business is expensive and very, very difficult to build. So, sometimes it's just, you don't have a lot of choice. Sometimes it's about making the only decision available to you. So I tend to kind of favour that. And then, I get asked a lot about hiring people. A lot of people, I think, have been burned by taking on partners or even employees, especially at a sort of early stage. But I just think it's like any relationship. You've got to be willing to keep trying. And, your team and your people are the absolute lifeblood of your business. And that's a lovely thing. That's a really great thing. As Steve said, that's what he loves to do, is actually the internal stuff. So, work with that, enjoy it.
And Steve, just finally over to you. Obviously, Sage has all these business owners on its system. So you see kind of what they're going through, what their challenges are, what their needs are. What are you hearing? And are the challenges any different now than they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
I think there's a lot of similarities, but I think, people always do come back to hiring. I think it is harder to hire. And I think going back to that purpose, I think if you want to bring people in and you want them to stay, they need to buy into the purpose. They need to buy into what you're doing. I think if you have transactional relationships where you're just paying someone to do a job, I think particularly in a small business, it's true in a big business, but I think particularly in a small business, that doesn't really work. Sophie used the word relationship. I think these are the people that you're going to spend time with. These are people you need to trust. These are people that you're going to hang out with. And so I think in finding the right people to create the right environment in your business is incredibly important. And so, unfortunately, I often say to people, if you want that to work, you have to spend a lot of time on it. So if you're hiring, unfortunately, it's time consuming because you won't hire the first person, or if you do, we have incredibly sophisticated hiring processes and assessment and so on. I always prefer developing people internally. I mean, I don't know whether I'm a terrible interviewer or what, but, it's hit and miss, right? You don't know people till you spend a lot of time with them and see what happens, particularly when they're under pressure, right? And then I think digital's huge. I think that's the thing that's really changing. So people talk about the fourth industrial revolution. The way that work flows and the way that things will be able to be automated, and so elevating the work of humans so that a lot of this repetitive transactional activity is done by machines, but also with generative AI, a lot more. You have so much more knowledge at your fingertips. What previously took days, weeks, months to research can be pulled together incredibly quickly. But it does put a premium on then how you interpret that, what do you do with it, how do you differentiate yourself? And so I've said a couple of times to customers, and I've said it publicly as well, if you're not in a digital economy, you won't be in the economy, right? So don't resist it, embrace it, and figure out what it does for you and your business. Because if you don't, someone else will.
Great advice. Thank you so much actionable insight, really practical advice for all our listeners. Really appreciate you making the time and coming on the show, guys.
It's been lovely.
Thank you very much.
Phew, what a duo. Thanks to Sophie Cornish and Steve Hare. Check out the uber cool clothing brand Sophie's working on right now, busbyandfox.com, and follow them on Instagram. Steve Hare is on Twitter @Steve Hare, so you can give him some pointers on learning Portuguese. Use the hashtag Sound Advice Podcast if you have any questions or comments regarding the themes on today's show. That's it from me. See you soon for more Sound Advice.